everyone. My name is Nikki Godden-Rasul. I'm a senior lecturer at Newcastle University Law School, UK, and I'm the co-editor along with Lucia Kula of the Research Handbook on Gender Violence and Law. And I'm really pleased to be here with one of the contributors to the handbook, Silvana Tapia Tapia.
Hello, I am Silvana Tapia Tapia. I am an associate professor in law at the University of Birmingham Law School, and I contributed to this amazing collection with a chapter called Acompañamiento as Ethical Practice, Challenging Coloniality and Academic Extractivism in Feminist Research.
Can you just tell us a little bit about why you wanted to contribute to the handbook?
So after about a decade of investigating violence against women, not only in the form of what we call gender-based violence, but also what I call laws violence against women, I have had a lot of experience both in documentary and empirical research, and I felt like I needed to make a pause, sit down, and reflect on the ethical dimensions of the empirical research, especially because one of my recent projects included grassroots women's organizations, many of which are situated in quite underprivileged communities and sectors of Ecuador, which is my country of origin, and this presented new challenges that had not emerged in my prior research when I engaged more with political elites. So this was a great opportunity to reflect on not only the substance of the work, but also all the implications, the affective labor that is invested in conducting feminist research, and the ethical tensions and concerns that can emerge when we engage with marginalized communities.
Thanks, Silvana. And I think we'd had some of these conversations already, and this is one of the reasons that Lucia and I were really keen to have your chapter as part of the handbook. And, when we were thinking about what we wanted the handbook to include, we really wanted those chapters around methodology and ethics and positionality, which many of the chapters touch on, but this is one of those which really beautifully covers all of those dimensions. Would you like to tell everyone more about the chapter?
Yeah, sure. So this chapter starts covering some of the literature that addresses academic extractivism, which is a term that sort of reflecting colonial extractivism of resources from colonized territories to for the benefit of the colonizers. Academic extractivism reflects that idea and conveys the phenomenon by which Western, white, Eurocentric, let's say, researchers may come into the field, that is the global South or a marginalized community, collect data, take it and process it and publish, and then maybe get a promotion based on that publication, but without any tangible, meaningful benefits for the community, which is also treated as an object of inquiry rather than a co-producer of knowledge, which is a different way of looking at things. And after reviewing some of the literature that already exists in this realm, I tried to focus more on something that has been a bit less discussed, which is the positionality of those of us who are from the global South, have been based there for a long time, but due to being an academic, we have certain privileges, although we still are very often minoritized in our own academic institutions and environments. And then we confront the tension of being an insider in many ways, but also an outsider due to this academic label that now we have. And as a non-white woman who no longer lives in Ecuador, where I come from, and has the privilege of having a steady job at this point, although when I wrote the chapter, I still was under a fixed-term contract. So things are always a bit shaky and also a bit privileged. And I think that liminal space, that interstice, is very interesting to explore and very necessary to explore. I think that many of us carry a sense of guilt about the fact that we know that the communities are struggling, that we know that people have very pressing needs, and we are writing about them sometimes in a way that is not even accessible for them or for the broader public. And we, in many ways, have to do that because of the academic canon, because it needs to be refable, as we say now, so that it qualifies as good research under the Research Excellence Framework in the UK and so on. So it's always a lot of tension, like it's a feeling of being pulled from different sides at the same time. And I wanted to reflect on that. And I don't think that I reached any solution or definitive conclusion. It's more about coming to terms with continuously revising, restructuring, and interrogating our own methodology, our own processes. I also found that long-term commitments with agendas, with communities, with collectives, with projects tend to be a bit less extractive, if that's possible, than one-off engagements or exchanges with people's projects. And it ends up becoming a way of being in the world, really, to be in this constant communication with those who are collaborators and learning to produce knowledge together, not only for this one project or for this one article, but rather as a life project in many ways. I do not think that that is, a normative or a recipe or a formula to conduct ethical research. Rather, it is an exploration of what I found to be a way to conduct research that mitigates, even if just a little, the inherent extractivism of academia. So I, by the end of the article, I do bring in some of the conversations that I've had with people, and the word acompañamiento, which is Spanish for accompaniment, but I preserve the original term because in Spanish it conveys both emotional and material support, I guess. It is a word used a lot by feminists as well, and that's why I brought in some fragments of interviews where people use the word acompañamiento to refer to their own political feminist practice and what they do when they work with other women. So I end in a conclusion that acompañamiento is not just research as such, is also those non-academic spaces of doing things together, such as cooking, commuting, just having a cup of coffee, where a lot of knowledge is also produced there, and political agendas come together in that kind of space. And I also wanted to bring attention to that. So the chapter really, as I said, doesn't follow a super standard structure, and it doesn't really arrive to a definitive conclusion. It is rather a reflection on tensions, on processes, on the willingness and openness to interrogate ourselves as researchers continuously, as uncomfortable as that may be, but also to maybe cut ourselves some slack at times and channel that guilt-driven energy, I guess, into engaging with people in an affectionate, respectful manner, where their needs, priorities, and projects matter and become central to our collective processes.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the many things that's so valuable about the chapter is, it shouldn't provide a blueprint or, particular formula for doing this kind of work, but it's so hard to do that real reflective work and negotiate all those tensions, that it is just so helpful still to see someone else's thought processes of doing that, because I think the environment of the academy doesn't encourage us to do that work properly, and it does need real time and effort and space and care for both oneself and the research participants and other members of the community might be engaging with. So creating that time and space is really important. I think that chapter really helps to show that and how it's possible to do that really well.
Yeah, and but also I think it is a call for institutions to realize, to acknowledge, recognize, and enable the possibility of ethically committed research. I have undergone several institutional ethical clearance processes before conducting empirical work. And, you know, there is a lot of focus on formality, on consent forms, on data management plans, and GDPR, and, you know, like a lot of regulation and legal aspects, which I understand why institutions look into that. But in the end, you know, it's not part of the ethical clearance processes, or at least the ones I have been involved in, to be accountable as a researcher to the community. They want metrics on how the project impacted the real world, right? And then impact is institutionally understood very often as impact on elites, on policymakers, in our case, on legislators, and the impact of research on community day-to-day life is not that valued, really, and it is a kind of impact that requires a lot of emotional labor, a lot of immaterial labor, that certain academics tend to do more than others, by which I mean very often, you know, women of color are constantly thinking about that. And because it takes time and care, as you said, it also means that you make the decision of using your time and energy for this kind of engagement as opposed to other more strategic activity that may be better for your own promotion, right? So this is a reflection that is really not about us deciding one thing or the other. It is about institutions creating an environment and a series of rules that force people to have to be very individualistic and selfish in order to move forward. And I think that resisting that is critical, but it is not only about resisting at the cost of our own health, time, and well-being. It is really about coming together and telling institutions that their practice is not really that meaningful when it comes to the real world of ordinary people and our day-to-day lives.
Absolutely. And I think you've already covered this, but just to ask it to capture it more neatly, I guess, tell us why this is so important to you.
So maybe to contextualize a little bit, the research that I reflect on in the chapter involves speaking to anti-carceral feminist collectives. The chapter focuses on Ecuador, but a part of the research also involved the UK. And I focused on Ecuador because it is where I found most of the tensions that I've spoken about. And by doing the research, I came into contact with many women who are carers of incarcerated people. They are wives, partners, mothers, etc. And my research has always had, in some way, a connection to prisons. But now I realize the importance of a very invisible space, so to speak, which is the carceral periphery, or the zone of proximity to prisons, often inhabited by these women who may not be incarcerated. They're not parties in a criminal legal process. They are not complainants or plaintiffs, but they are really always crossing that very porous prison wall all the time. And they are impacted by the penal violence. And this is really important for me because I have come to identify a form of suffering that is always happening. It never ends. It only gets worse. And very few people are talking about it. Because of the stigmatization that incarcerated people suffer, this also extends to their families. And women who are connected in any way to an incarcerated man, which is usually how the relationship is, are also very stigmatized and never prioritized by public policy, by sometimes even human rights organizations are not aware of what is going on. So for me, it's really important to continue engaging with these hidden spaces where laws, violence against women is operating all the time, causing a lot of harm. And as I said, also this research tends not to be considered impactful because you are working not with the policymakers or the legislators, but rather trying to understand the grounded needs of the people who are going through this. But I still feel, and this is difficult to explain, like my work through my life will always be somewhat connected to prisons, because I think that it is one of those spaces where people are most made to appear as deserving the most inhumane kinds of suffering. And no one cares. I could say that, obviously I'm overgeneralizing, but I mean in the public sphere, in our daily conversations, in our debates, very few of us are speaking about these extreme forms of violence and suffering that occur within and around prisons. So for me, it is a life commitment, really.
Well, thank you so much for all your important work and for contributing your chapter to the Handbook on Gender Violence and Law. So, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you.